The former Sandwing kingdom was one of the most influential parts of the Empire's history. After the smoke of the War of Unification settled, it was what was left of the Sandwing kingdom that provided the groundwork for the new empire. Hi, I'm your host Heatwave, and in today's lore episode, I'll be looking into how the former Sandwing kingdom and the Tyrant of the Mojave influenced the founding of the Empire of Pareena. My father once stood on this very window and said, "Son, this all one day will be yours." He didn't notice how I stabbed him in the heart. Poor fool, thinking he could keep his power. What an idiot. Cinnamon, my desert flower, come here. I'm bored. Turn around and let me idle at you for a while. Welcome back to the Wings of Fire spin-off series Empire of Pareena. If you haven't done so already, please leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes I publish. So, in today's lore episode, I'll be exploring some of the history and the former ruler of the Sandwing Kingdom. I'll also be exploring how it influenced the founding of the new Empire of Pareena. Now, before we begin, there is a lot of speculation around the information I have available. While, yes, it all comes from the primary source, but it's all in Old Sandwing. But Heatwave, I hear you say, how can you read Old Sandwing? You've stated before that you can't read the old ways of writing, you silly Sandwing. Well, my answer to that is I may not be able to read it, but the Lord Custodii can. He, for some strange reason, understands their language. He has, bewillingly, helped me translate some of the oldest scrolls in the Imperial Library to unlock its secrets about the history of the Empire. Anyway, the Lord Custodii translated a lot of information for me as I was annoying him, so, well, here it is. Now, the old Sandwings didn't seem to have a date system, so we kind of have to guess how old some of their practices are. I can't really give a clear date to some events that happened before the War of Unification, but we will start at what happened before the Tyrant of the Mojave came to power. Well, that's the thing. We don't know. The first writing didn't come into effect before him, as all documents point towards his name. But we can speculate from these old scrolls that the Tyrant stripped a lot of the cultural identity of the Sandwings. His thinking became that the Sandwings needed to progress technologically and logically to become the dominant power over Pareena. He wanted to move away from the priority of music, dance, and other useless things that other winglets of Pareena did. He wanted to create a nation-state where the idea of elitism and iron will ruled over all. He wanted to militarize the Sandwings and put them on a position to dominate the whole of Pareena. But that's the kicker. I haven't actually said a lot about the Tyrant of the Mojave. Sure, I've given snippets in a few episodes, but nothing concrete. Because, well, when we actually look deeper into the character of the Tyrant, we have a lot to actually thank him for. Sure, he was horrible and deplorable, and it's in his name, but without him, we wouldn't see the rise of the first Empress Ocean, or how Prince Nevada argued for a fair unification of Pareena. Without the Tyrant, we would have no empire. So let's explore him in a bit further detail, and there is a lot of information I've been able to gather up, but they are possibly biased towards him, talking him up, so the information at hand may not be actually accurate. Now, we don't know much about his early life. His father must have been the former ruler of the Sandwings, logically. His mother is unknown. It's also unknown if he had any siblings, but it's safe to assume if he did, he would have killed them all, preventing them from, sitting the throne. Of course, he would eventually kill his father. That's how he gained power, viewing him as quite low and foolish. The Tyrant, as he began calling himself as a title of strength, was not only smart, but he had a pretty big ego too. He envisioned the Mojave, the envy of all the other pathetic kingdoms across Pareena. He envisioned an army, not a mere guard force, but an organized, armed, and loyal military ready to die for their fellow Sandwings. He envisioned great plains of camel herders and cactus farms to help feed the growing population of Sandwings. He was Tyrant by name, but in his mind, he was a savior for his actions. As a young prince, of course, he would be taught the many ins and outs of government and life in the Mojave. He rubbed wings with the Sandwings of many different demographics, from poor farmers to the fat, rich carpet makers. He realized quickly his father was doing nothing in his power as a ruler, to fix anything or to at least progress the Sandwings. The turning point for the Tyrant was when he got to visit the small coastal community of Beach. This small gathering of Seawings had begun to set up a home life inside the Mojave's shores. They must have migrated from the Tail Islands, heading all the way to the west of Pareena. The current ruler of the Mojave wanted to formally introduce himself and, in a way, welcome them. Finally, the Tyrant could meet other dragons. But he was disappointed. The Seawings were idiots. They couldn't form a town, a government, benefit from any of the material wealth of the Mojave. They were inferior to the Sandwings, and yet his father, the former ruler of the Mojave, did nothing to show their strength. So, the Tyrant ended up killing him and taking over, backstabbing him and beginning a new golden age of the Sandwings. He did everything. Public education, communal farming, grew the mining and construction sectors all over the Mojave, oversaw the founding of California, and as I've mentioned in a lot of past episodes, the Tyrant's progress over the Mojave is still felt in Pareena today. The Sandwings became the first winglets to create what we in Pareena today would call a modern society. He even had laws. Well, one law. Loyalty to him and him alone. He, being a very smart dragon, he interacted with the Sandwings of his great new kingdom. He was charismatic and charming. He worked up dragons into a patriotic mindset, all under the eyes of sowing the seeds of hatred to the other winglets. He spoke of all other dragons as pathetic losers who can't hold a candle to the glory of the new Sandwing. Those who didn't like his new ideas or who were disloyal, well, they were killed quite quickly. The Tyrant watched with vigor as his new rulership shaped into a loyal, prosperous, and successful kingdom. It was said that upon the creation of his Tyrant's legions, his military arm, well, he actually enjoyed watching them march up and down the outskirts of Shady Sands, always on parade. With the economy thriving, though, a newly formed army, and his name known all over the Mojave and in some parts of Pareena, the Tyrant's next step was to change Sandwing culture. Long gone are the days of festivals and music and creativity. No, he wanted a Mojave that was cold, logical, and progressive. That's why not a lot of old Sandwing culture remains, as I've stated a few times in some past episodes. This was the Tyrant's first step, but more would come. Next was to secure his borders from outsiders. The Tyrant had a deep hatred for hybrids. He saw them as abominations. At this time, though, hybrids were pretty rare compared to Pareena now, with the constant mixing of winglets. From documents I've read, it's stated that the Mojave had recorded about 209 hybrids of different winglet matches. All but one was put to the sword and executed. Well, but why was that? The Tyrant chose one hybrid for his own personal use, sparing her from death. And of course, this would be the Mudwing hybrid, known as Cinnamon. Now remember that small sea-wing settlement called Beach? Well, they would be next, but I'll save that for a different episode. With the borders locked down and any other winglet thrown out or killed, word had spread of the Tyrant and his exploits, and his name finally had some merit. At this point, the Sandwings adopted the new scorpion tail as their official identification symbol. The Tyrant thought to himself, though, well, if he is now the Tyrant of the Mojave, then why couldn't he be the Tyrant of Pareena? An ambitious plan, but in his mind, his far superior kingdom could crush any winglet with ease. The first task was crossing Pareena's spine. Sure, they could just fly over it, but moving all of their logistical equipment like food and water and spare gear, well, they needed to be towed across country. And the only major path through the spine was a large flat canyon called the Gap, which was currently in Skywing territory. The Sandwings and the Skywings enjoyed being close enough to benefit from some level of light trade, but mostly in skills, not resources. But the Skywings were not allies with them. Yet. If you've been following on with the story so far, you'll know that the War of Unification began over a border conflict between the Icewings and the Skywings. The Tyrant wishes to capture vast territory of the Skywings, so he first sided with the Icewings, but then figured if the Icewings betray him, well, they could just flee back into Claw Mountain with the sub-zero temperatures, where his armies couldn't follow them. So he was not very trusting of the Icewings and kind of wanted to switch sides. But he needed a reason to swap sides, and it's here we will talk about his two dragonettes. Summer, the oldest and one of the most agreeable to the Tyrant's beliefs, and his younger brother, Nevada, who was quite quiet and mostly dealt with internal matters. Due to Summer being much like his father, the Tyrant feared his first dragonette. Summer would have the ambition and the intelligence to overthrow his father. So, the Tyrant killed him and blamed the Icewings, allowing him to swap sides. The Tyrant would spend the next 3 cycles trying to genocide some parts of Pareena, all the while using and abusing his allies in the Skywings, who thought that they would gain something out of being in this new alliance. How wrong they were. Of course, the Tyrant would lose the War of Unification to the Sea-Wing Princess Ocean and her loyalists. He would be backstabbed by his own son Nevada, who pulled strings in the background, sold out by his own personal guards, and finally publicly executed by the first Empress. But how did the Tyrant of the Mojave influence the founding of the new unified Pareena, the Empire of Pareena? Well, Nevada, of course, didn't agree with his father on simply taking power by force. He believed that a dragon should be loyal not only to his ruler, but to his family and kin. Believed that a dragon can best thrive when their basic needs are met, but not just by food or water. They need something to inspire them, something that inspires loyalty, creativity, intellect, and reflection. Sounds familiar, don't you think? Nevada was able to teach many of these ideas to Cinnamon before her military career and convinced her he was worth backing. A third of the Tyrant's armies were now against him. I think that Nevada does deserve his own special mini-episode at this point though, but we'll have to save that for later. But there is also Princess Ocean. One action that sent her into the mindset of unification was in her travel west towards the Mojave with her loyalists. They came across a small settlement razed to the ground, and charred bodies lay strewn about. These were once the Rockwings, a small insignificant winglet that was made an example of. The Sandwings massacred their population, destroyed their hatcheries, and took the females as slave trophies. Ocean saw firsthand this new Pareena, one of death, enslavement, and hell. Her mind was made up. The tyrant must die. Of course, even with his last breath, the tyrant's philosophy still haunted Ocean, for the tyrant's last words to Ocean were, "All beings experience the hunger for power, a constant reminder of their insignificance. This blooming inside us all, which demands that only by taking from without and devouring from within can we extend our deal to the gods. Hunger is the universal to those destined to die." Without the tyrant of the Mojave, the Empire wouldn't form. Nevada wouldn't have laid the ground framework from his own experience. And of course, Ocean wouldn't become the first Empress, stepping up as a leader. But now let's look at how, as the smoke settled across Pareena, especially the Mojave, how the leftover Sandwings influenced the new Empire of Pareena, but also how the Sandwings suffered. Firstly, the Empire picked up a lot of things the Sandwing Kingdom left behind: the vast mines, the skilled crafters and smiths, tons of material wealth, gold, metal, weapons, strange relics. The new Empire had everything it needs to jumpstart its organization. In fact, the Sandwings' written language was quickly converted into a common tongue as early as the second cycle. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Those Sandwings loyal to the tyrant would be publicly executed as well, and Ocean's loyalists engaged in mass looting of Sandwing stockpiles, even engaging in thievery. The first cycle was rocky and shaky post-war, but without the Sandwings, without the tyrant of the Mojave, we wouldn't have the Empire of Pareena. But when talking about the history of the Mojave and Sandwings, you'll find that it spreads across a lot of topics that leads into the modern empire. So in my episodes on agriculture, manufacturing, and mining, you'll probably hear more about how the Sandwings did it first, but we still don't give them enough credit for just how much they did for the Empire. And that concludes another lore episode of the Empire of Pareena. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with more lore episodes about this expansive Wings of Fire series. But until then, this is your host Heatwave, signing off.